Shalom and welcome to the One Pasuk podcast, in which three rabbis from Englewood, New Jersey, each share an insight on one particular pasuk from the Parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. This week will feature our once-a-month episode on relationships in the Parsha with my better half, my wife Shoshana, a teacher and school administrator for 20 years, who transitioned her career to become a social worker specializing in couples and individual therapy, all while serving as a dedicated rebbitzin. Next week we'll return to our regularly scheduled programming with your favorite rabbinic banter with Rabbi Chukas-Balak and Rabbi Daniel Goldberg.
שבאותו המעט אינו רשע, ועל ידי זה שמוצא בו מעט טוב, ודן אותו לכף זכות, על ידי זה מעלה אותו באמת לכף זכות.
Our one pasuk for this week's episode for Parshas Chukas, our monthly episode on relationships that I do with my better half, Shoshana. The pasuk we'll be discussing comes from Perek Chaf Pasuk Yud Beis, chapter 20, verse 12. ויאמר Hashem el Moshe ve'al Aharon. Hashem says to Moshe and Aharon in the wake of the controversial event in which Bnei Yisrael complains for water, and Moshe reacts quite strongly, and instead of speaking to the rock, he hits the rock. And so Hashem says to him and to Aharon, Ya'an lo ha'amantem bi להקדישני לעיני Bnei Yisrael, because you failed to demonstrate faith and trust in me, to sanctify me in front of Bnei Yisrael. L'chein lo saviu es הקהל hazeh el הארץ אשר נתתי להם. Therefore, you will not bring this congregation to the land that I have given to them. This is the event known as Mei Meriva, the famous event in which Moshe hits the rock and is doomed together with Aharon not to enter Israel. It is a tragic story. It is a difficult story and multifaceted, multi-layered. So much to reflect on in all of the dynamics going on here. Shoshana, what do you think?
So for me, this is one of the most difficult and really one of the most painful stories in the Torah. Let's remind ourselves that Moshe never wanted the job of leading the Jewish people, and yet once he took it, he dedicated himself 200%, put himself on the line countless times. He really stood by the people unconditionally. And then in this single moment, everything he yearns for fell apart. As you just mentioned, having yelled at them or spoke harshly to them. Should I get water from you from this rock? Having hit the rock twice. This is what earns him a denial into the land of Israel. And remember later on in the Torah when Moshe tells us, V'atchanan al Hashem be'itahi, I begged God to reverse my fate. And the answer was a hard no. And in trying to understand what went wrong here so that things add up, there's no shortage of commentary. There are those who argue over what single mistake Moshe made. There are those who tack on multiple mistakes. But reading through them year after year, I still, and maybe it's me, but I'm still left with this angst inside of me that just feels like it's not fair to Moshe. The punishment doesn't meet the crime. He didn't deserve this. And recently, I saw an idea from Rabbi Shai Held that really shifted my thinking on this whole incident. What Rabbi Held points out is that among the themes that course through the Jewish people, one of them, Moshe discovers from the very first time he meets them, and it courses through the next 40 years. And that's the theme of the Jewish people complaining. They do a lot of complaining, and God gets angry and frustrated with them a lot of the time. And the near enemy of their complaining so much is that Moshe began to see and to respond to their complaints as almost like a recurring pattern, as the same loop that was just playing out again and again. And so to Moshe, this complaint for water was just one more example of something that he had heard from the people so many times already.
What do you mean by near enemy?
The near enemy is something we almost accidentally fall into. Moshe's greatest strength as a leader is that he defended the people again and again and again, and he sacrificed himself for them. But it wore on him and it wore him down. I would almost suggest without him noticing it. Because what happened was he started to develop in his head a pattern of thinking about they're complaining. They are complainers. And if you don't notice that, that's why it's a near enemy. It's right there, but you can miss it so easily. And as I'm going to go on to explain, he missed that was the filter through which he had started to see the Jewish people through. The problem was that this time was not the same playing out again. This time was different. And we see that most clearly because this time God doesn't get angry with the Jewish people as he had so many other times when they complained. Instead, Hashem told Moshe exactly what to say to the people because what God saw was an opening. He saw the people were open to doing this time different. But Moshe couldn't hear it. He couldn't see that new reality that was just beginning to unfold. Moshe's narrative in his head about the people was that they were an am kshei oref. They were stubborn, they were complainers, and it was that filter, not this one act of defiance, which disqualified him from leading the people forward into the land.
So what you're saying basically is that the mistake that's made here is that Moshe is seeing Bnei Israel through a particular lens that confines them, that pigeonholes them into something, complainers.
Exactly. And I would even, it may be an oversimplification, so you'll excuse me, but it's a little bit like we talk about the difference between a punishment and a consequence. When we talk about a mistake that you get a punishment for, that's one paradigm. This was Moshe putting almost on display for God that this was his filter through which he couldn't break free in how he saw the Jewish people. And so the natural consequence was that they needed a different leader to lead them into the next stage where they were going to be different than they had been thus far.
Are you taking that approach that Moshe being denied entry into the land of Israel wasn't a punishment, rather it was a necessary outcome of what Hashem saw as a need for new leadership?
An incredibly, incredibly painful one. And as I throw that one around in my head, I always think about an approach that I think I saw, maybe I made it up, I don't even remember, of why couldn't he go in as just an anonymous citizen? He didn't have to be the leader, just let him go, have his dream come true, let him go into the land of Israel. That couldn't come to fruition, and that's a different discussion. But yes, exactly, as who he was as a leader to the people, he could not take them to the next step in their evolution of a people. Moshe here really models what all of us do in so many different aspects of our life. And as a therapist, I see it most often, but not exclusively, really sitting with couples. Because the reality is for most couples, for completely understandable reasons, they come into therapy long after they should have, which means that they're usually deep in cycles of interactions that feel like every miss, every hurt, every infraction is just another example of something they've seen and heard before from each other so many times. It's that filter that Moshe saw the Jewish people through. And it's in that space that the therapist sits. The therapist who's just as human as the couple, but is able to be just a little bit more objective because he or she is a little bit more removed. The couple's therapist's job to listen to their dialogue, to watch their interactions, and to highlight for them that there really is hope for things to be different. That kind of hope that you want to be able to give to a couple has to be really concrete, and it has to be grounded, specific to the two individuals you're sitting with. It can't be blind optimism, platitudes, statistics thrown at them. It's a hard space to be in, but the foundation is being able to sit with a different filter than the two individuals sitting in front of you are looking through. That's really the key.
So I thought you were going in a much different direction. I thought you were going to say that one of the things that you found as a therapist that is a strength that anybody can learn is to recognize when we're seeing things through a certain lens. And that if we have a certain character analysis constructed in our minds of this person or that person, that anything they do is going to be seen through that. And it denies us the opportunity to give people the benefit of the doubt to look at a situation in a more sophisticated way. And it's really something we just do naturally as humans, right? Things have to make sense, right? We have to have an understanding of our world and the people in our world. But what Moshe is reminding us and what Hashem is reminding us in a painful way is that there's a near enemy to that, and that is misjudging situations.
We're definitely touching on a related idea. The lens that I'm talking about, I guess I have really the humble privilege of working on day in and day out, because the role of the therapist is a tricky one. It's first and foremost putting yourself in your client's shoes, not seeing them through your lens, which means you've got to be deeply in touch with your own stuff. Once you can put yourself in their shoes, it's not, and I think I've said this before, it's not just unconditional validation and agreement. It's really about being compassionately curious with them about the experience that they're having and making sure that they're utilizing the ability to broaden and deepen their own perspective while still maintaining standing right there with them and what they're experiencing. That's a hard task. And I guess I'm talking about it from the lens of a therapist because I find it easiest to do when I'm not doing it myself in my own personal life, because we're all biased by our own stuff. So it's easier for me to talk about this from the perspective of where I sit most, but not exclusively, objectively. But of course, I'm also talking about myself as it would be applicable to any human being. And I think what's so resonant for me is that the more I sit and see how I can be objective to others, I also realize how hard it is for me to do that in my own personal life, which deepens my awareness of how hard this is for us to do. As Moshe had displayed, the greatest of all leaders, who put himself on the line and yet couldn't really break from the filter through which he saw the people.
So I think you're doing something remarkable, which is trying to show people that this is a challenge that anybody has, even somebody who's skilled at being able to help others through it. Can you give some concrete examples? Can you talk about a conversation, a session you've had with a couple in which, there was a certain either misunderstanding, a conflict that was sorted out or that was understood better once everyone came to realize that they were seeing it through a particular lens?
I think I'm going to use the liberty of giving a personal example that I've given to so many clients. I remember when our oldest, who's 19, Ayala, was born. Not such an easy baby, cried a lot, and we were first-time parents, didn't quite know what we were doing. And we were, I don't know if you remember, we were at your father for Pesach, and we were at the Seder, and Ayala was screaming her head off, and I was upstairs trying to get her to bed for what felt like an eternity.
She was 2 months old at the time, if I remember correctly.
Very young, very small, didn't eat, screamed. And I remember just growing more and more and more frustrated that the Seder was continuing on downstairs and you, because we're talking about spouses, didn't come up to help. And it took us a long time to understand where we were each sitting in that scenario. And I remember your perspective was so different than anything I could have imagined while sitting where I was, which was, no, you got this. And I know how unbelievably capable you are. And I didn't want to look like that husband who needed to go rescue his incapable new mom wife. Just the opposite. I was holding myself back from coming up because I didn't want to look like that. And I didn't want you to think that I was sending everybody around the table that message. I mean, to me, that's such a stark example of different perspectives, lack of experiences together to know what works for each other. We're talking about first-time parents with a 2-month-old. There are countless examples. I don't want to give the impression that everything can get explained away that way. Sometimes people really unintentionally hurt one another. And I mean that, really unintentionally. But so often, you're sitting in different places with different thoughts, different motives, and that comes out once we can start unpacking and making space for those perspectives.
So what exactly was the filter, the narrative in this example?
So you're going to laugh, but the narrative was, I come from a particularly quiet family. Anybody who knows the Pupkos knows they're a little bit more boisterous and loud and fun. And the narrative was when they're having fun together, they don't hear anything else. They're just doing their own thing, hearing their own laughter and their enjoyment and hanging out together. And everybody forgot about me. I'm upstairs with this screaming baby and nobody hears what's going on. And this negative narrative that I was seeing this through obviously came from just feeling helpless and exhausted and frustrated. The examples that come up, I don't even think we need to get specific to one. Anytime you hear terminology that's black and white, all or nothing, you always, you never, this is what goes on all the time. The minute you start hearing terms like that, you know that an individual is stuck in a narrative with a filter that has developed for understandable reasons, but makes it really hard to hear both the exception to the rule as well as believing that narrative can change. And that when you see something different, there's a lot of skepticism as to, can it last? Is it sincere? Are you doing it just to appease me? That's what we sit with so much of the time.
So the real challenge of this is that our minds have to construct narratives, right? We have to be able to learn from our experiences and learn about our friends and our partners so that we get to know them and we anticipate and we know their likes and their dislikes. And yet at the same time, if we're careless with that narrative, with that perspective, and we overdo it, then it could lead to, again, seeing things through a certain lens and confining somebody to a certain narrative. And so I'm just saying it's challenge is highlighted by the fact that we need to do this behavior to a degree, but we can't take it too far.
And that goes back to what you asked me before about the near enemy. That's exactly correct. We have a confirmation bias for good reason. It helps us conserve energy. It helps us make sense of things quicker, more efficiently. And exactly as you said, there's a near enemy to that. And certainly when it comes with our own areas of sensitivities and things that feel painful, that only increases the chances of the near enemy of seeing things through a familiar lens.
So there's a well-known observation on the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, which says, "Have done es kol ha'adam l'kaf schus," which translated most simply means one should judge every person favorably. But there's one commentary that makes the observation that kol ha'adam doesn't mean every person. Kol ha'adam means look at the entire person. That in order to judge someone favorably, you're supposed to look at the entire context of the person. I think we can take it in a slightly different direction based on what we're saying. And that is, have done as kol ha'adam. You have to get to know a person and establish understandings and perspectives about a person. But you always have to remember the kaf zchus. It always has to be kept in check and maintained with an open mind so that you are not stereotyping or just always seeing a person through a particular lens, right? Kol adam, but be careful.
It's a beautiful approach. It really is. And it's hard. It's so hard. It's so hard and it's so human. I think that's the biggest gift that Moshe gives us, is highlighting for us how human it is, how hard it is. Doesn't matter if you're a therapist and you sit and work on this day in and day out. The minute you fall into your own life, those patterns come up, those biases come up, those filters come up. We're just as human as everybody else. The more personal it is, the harder it is to be objective. In that sense, I always say the therapist is just as human as the clients they're sitting in front of, they're sitting with. Only difference is that they're not married to each other, and so they can be a little bit more objective. Otherwise, we're all working on this as human beings.
Reminds me of another Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Al tifrosh minat tzibur. A person shouldn't disconnect from the community. V'al tamin ba'atzmecha ad yom mos. Don't be completely confident in yourself until your day of death. Which to me in this context means that the understandings and the narratives and the perspectives that we have gained for ourselves and are useful, and they should continue to be useful, don't ever leave them unquestioned, right? Always have a little bit of a doubt that maybe this situation's different or maybe I missed this. And what's interesting is that the next thing Hillel says is, Al tadines chavercha ad shetegia limkomo. Don't judge your friend until you come to his place, which this is basically what it's saying, but I would sharpen it a little bit by saying that a person shouldn't judge their friend until they get to their place, till they're in the same place. But really what you could say is, don't judge your friend until you're in the same space as him, as if you've come as close as you can to that other person and really try to see them for who they are.
It's such a beautiful idea. It highlights something that I said earlier, which is how tricky it is to sit with somebody and really try to put yourself in their shoes while at the exact same time try to maintain some objectivity. That's how you can truly be helpful to another person.
So it sounds, based on this, that there are times when we feel like we're just functioning on autopilot. Can you recommend any specific tools how to recognize when we're operating on autopilot and we should try to wake ourselves up? We know we should be doing this, but how do we remind ourselves?
It's such an important question. I'm far less concerned when we go into autopilot, and I'm far more concerned when our filter comes up, when we're triggered, when we're in the middle of an argument, when we're in a conflict. Because when our filter comes up in those contexts, we have much more at stake. We're in a protective space. We're in what we call the fight, flight, or freeze mode, where I have to protect my emotional well-being, my relational well-being. And that's when my filter can serve me in far more dangerous ways than if we're just simply on autopilot mode. That one is much easier to notice and to shift.
Yeah, it's ironic, but it makes sense that we rely on our filters, our preconceived narratives when things are chill, when we're on autopilot. But the real challenge is the other extreme, when we are angry about something, when it's a stressful situation. And that, on the other extreme, that's when we also fall into our narratives. And so I think that's really where we need the tools to catch ourselves, because it's most difficult to catch ourselves when we're worked up, when we're in a conflict, we're in an argument. That's when it's hardest to take a step back and to think about things a little more broadly. What kind of tools would you recommend?
I'm going to stick with number one, the most important, by far the hardest, and that is slow things down. Slow things down physically. Look at your heart rate. John Gottman has a tool that he uses now in session where he has his couples wear a pulse oximeter throughout the session, every session.
And Google's telling me that a pulse oximeter, it measures the level of oxygen in your blood and your heart rate.
Which in layman's terms is the couple and his way of seeing how worked up they are. And so he has them look at the numbers when they're just talking about something neutral. And then when they get worked up, look at the numbers again. And he has them pause until those numbers drop. And once they're back down at a calm place, then they can continue to discuss the topic that has gotten them so worked up. Most of us, myself included, cannot have a good conversation when we're worked up. It's just asking us human beings something that is really, really hard. We have got to slow ourselves down, our body physically, and then the racing thoughts that we have probably gone 10 steps ahead, had the conversation in our head of what the person's going to say back to me, what I'm going to answer, what they're going to say back, and what I'm going to answer. We can jump so quickly ahead of the conversation. So we need to slow ourselves down physically, and then we need to slow down our thoughts and listen without already planning what we're going to be saying in response.
So coming back to the pasuk that we were talking about, one could see how the way the Torah presents Moshe, and certainly according to some of the commentaries, as reacting out of anger, that's a great example of what it means to go into that fight-flight mode and the negative consequences when we're not able to catch ourselves, pause, slow down. And it's not something you're just supposed to start doing. It's an awareness that's developed over time, over many different, a lifetime.
Literally.
Many different exchanges and experiences. And it's something that we try to cultivate.
I joke with people these days that it's funny that I'm starting to finally understand that you can't rush life experience. I know it sounds silly, but I feel it so viscerally in the sense that You want to accumulate those experiences quicker and more efficiently so you can just get it right. You can't rush this stuff. The best you can do is to show up in the moments that these situations present themselves and be able to deepen your awareness a little bit better than you did the time before.
צריך לדון את כל אדם לכף זכות. דע, כי צריך לדון את כל אדם לכף זכות. ואפילו מי שהוא רשע גמור, צריך לחפש ולמצוא בו איזה מעט טוב. שבאותו המעט אינו רשע, ועל ידי זה שמוצא בו מעט טוב, ודן אותו לכף זכות, על ידי זה מעלה אותו באמת לכף זכות, ויכול להשיבו בתשובה. צריך לדון את כל אדם לכף זכות. דע, כי צריך לדון את כל אדם לכף זכות. ואפילו מי שהוא רשע גמור, צריך לחפש ולמצוא בו איזה מעט טוב, שבאותו המעט אינו רשע, ועל ידי זה שמוצא בו מעט טוב, ודן אותו לכף זכות, על ידי זה מעלה אותו באמת לכף זכות, ויכול להשיבו בתשובה. כי צריך לדון את כל אדם לכף זכות. דע, כי צריך לדון את כל אדם לכף זכות.